Welcome to End of Life Matters, a conference of Hope Ireland. My name is Steve Johnson. I'm a radio journalist from Dublin and I'm your host for today. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for taking the time to be at the conference and learn a little bit more on this very important topic. There's actually been great interest in the conference, and apparently we have around 900 members of the public registered. I'd like at the outset to comment that while the conference has a positive message, which is End of Life Matters, we're going to be discussing some heavy topics for a Saturday morning, including matters around illness, dying and death. I'd encourage you, if you're prompted or are affected by the themes discussed today, to reach out to someone for help or to offer help. Today's conference will run from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. We have a great lineup of speakers, and I'll be ensuring that we don't keep you any longer than the advertised time. Our speakers include, among others, palliative care consultant and member of the UK House of Lords, Baroness Ilora Finlay, suicide prevention champion Joan Freeman, and international campaigner Alex Schadenberg. We'll have a panel discussion with doctors chaired by Dr. Miriam Colleran, as well as some time to respond to the questions that you will submit during today's conference. Now, the last time Hope Ireland held a conference in June 2020, the possibility of a proposal for euthanasia and assisted suicide coming before the Dáil was on the cards. Now it's a reality, with the private member's bill called the Dying with Dignity Bill currently making its way through the houses of the Oireachtas. This short video explains the current state of play with that private member's bill.
In the autumn of 2020, the Dying with Dignity Bill was introduced to Dáil Éireann. If it becomes law, it will legalise euthanasia and assisted suicide in Ireland. Euthanasia is the practice by which a doctor or healthcare professional directly and intentionally ends the life of a patient. Assisted suicide is the practice by which a person is given assistance, usually in the form of lethal medication, to end their own life. Both of these practices are currently illegal in Ireland. Euthanasia would be classified as a form of unlawful killing, and assisting in the suicide of another person is a crime, per Section 2 of the Criminal Law Suicide Act 1993. In addition to these laws, the Irish Medical Council guidelines state clearly in Section 46.9 you must not take part in the deliberate killing of a patient. Despite the bill passing second stage by a slim majority of 81 votes in favour to 71 votes against, the debate is far from over. The Oireachtas Committee on Justice is currently scrutinising the bill, and many people have written to them, expressing grave concerns about this legislation. In particular, the medical community in Ireland remains overwhelmingly opposed to the legislation. Their views are also shared by a considerable number of disability rights advocates, mental health campaigners, older persons, and other people of goodwill. The passage of the bill is not a foregone conclusion. The final stage vote in the Oireachtas still has to take place, so there's time to influence the outcome.
Now, if you've just joined us, you're very welcome to End of Life Matters conference by Hope Ireland. Shortly, I'm going to be talking to a person who was awarded Welsh Woman of the Year for her work in palliative care, but that's after my next guest, who's a graduate of University College Dublin, where he studied history and philosophy. He also has a master's degree in library and information studies. He has a diagnosis of spastic diplegia cerebral palsy and is a disability rights advocate. He wrote to the Oireachtas Committee on Justice expressing concern about the Dying with Dignity Bill, and he's with me now. Conor Lynott, thanks for joining us. Hiya, Conor.
Thank you very much for having me, Steve.
So first of all, Conor, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so my name is Conor Lynott. I am 24 and I live in Wexford Town. I have just finished a master's degree in library and information science in UCD. And before that, I completed a degree in history and philosophy there. During secondary school at Wexford CBS, I was the equality officer for the Irish second level students union. And in that capacity, I worked with the Irish Human Rights Commission, as it was then called. I also have a disability. I was born with cerebral palsy.
Okay, and so, but that hasn't stopped you going to college, getting a degree, doing a master's. So you've been very active.
Yes, I've been very active, and I'm passionate about this subject because it's a big topic of philosophy. So I've always been kind of
Okay.
interested in this
Yeah.
topic.
So you made a submission to the Justice Committee about the Dying with Dignity bill. Why did you decide to go to the trouble of doing that?
Okay, so I made this submission because I was concerned about the consequences of the bill for people with disabilities, and I was interested in this debate. I also felt I was in a position to comment on euthanasia because of my background in history and philosophy, and it's also worth noting that I was interested in the arguments against euthanasia, particularly the slippery slope arguments that would have been common in philosophy cycles. So I would have studied them, and when I saw this bill, I saw the submission as a platform to make my voice heard about my concerns about the euthanasia bill.
Now, first of all, you took issue, I suppose, in your submission with the title of the bill. Can you tell us why you particularly pointed out that?
Okay, so my concerns about the title of the bill are primarily the language around the dignity in the bill. Firstly, the bill doesn't define what dignity is, and secondly, there are unjustified and unsubstantiated assumptions, in my view, about the nature of the dying process in the bill. Looking at the title, Dying with Dignity, it assumes that the dying process is divided into dignified and undignified. The biggest problem with this is that if the bill is passed, it would mean that a national government is taking a position on what they regard as a dignified way to die. In my opinion, I think that this is highly manipulative and potentially unconstitutional, as it violates Irish citizens' rights to freely express their opinions and convictions as set out in Article 40 of the Irish Constitution. This is because the Irish government would be wrongfully using the influence of legislation to sway the public towards a certain opinion about the dying process, a matter that is deeply personal to a patient. For these reasons, I think the bill should be shelved.
Okay. You also talked about the term used in the bill, terminal illness. Why is that?
It's because I'm concerned about the social implications of the definition of terminal illness in the bill for people with disabilities. Firstly, the bill defines terminal illness as and I quote, incurable and progressive illness, which is likely to cause death. But this leaves several important questions unanswered. They are, at what point must illness be deemed incurable to qualify as a euthanasia case? This isn't answered in the bill. I mean, for example, does this mean incurable now, incurable at the time of illness, or incurable at any point in time? Also, at what speed must a condition be deteriorating before it qualifies as a euthanasia case? None of these questions are answered in the bill. Second, as part of the definition as terminal illness, there is no legally binding process outlined in Section 14 of the bill, which obliges medical staff responsible for carrying out a euthanasia procedure to be transparent about the decision-making process and the medical research involved in deeming a patient eligible for the procedure. The lack of a safeguard means that an important safeguard against medical negligence is missing in the bill. So to sum up, there is a vagueness and ambiguity in the bill terminology that could have negative implications for people with disabilities.
So, like, if this bill was to pass, Conor, how do you think it would affect disability rights?
I think there are certain implications for people with disability and the rights of if the bill's definition of terminal illness, due to its vagueness and lack of detail that I talked earlier, is enacted into law, which I also talk about in my original submission. In my view, it could lead to implications such as prioritization of some medical conditions over others because of the lack of clarity over which types of progressive illnesses qualify and which don't. I think it may also lead to ill-informed decisions. For example, patients volunteering for the procedure based on the misguided notion that they are a burden for society. This does happen according to a survey of euthanasia cases carried out in Oregon of the United States. 59% of the euthanasia cases were carried out because the patients felt that they were a burden on family and friends. This is something that politicians must be aware of, and it needs to be avoided. I think, and another reason why the bill should be shelved. They also diminish the inclusion of people with disabilities in society by failing to promote essential services and independent living by virtue of euthanasia being presented as a viable option in legislation. And finally, it may also lead to unfair and or discriminatory distribution of medical resources.
Okay. So you feel that as well as sort of a practical issue, it would have a cultural effect on.
Yeah, I do feel that it would have a cultural effect because I think as a society we have a risk of focusing less on independent living and support for people with disabilities to live independently than there would be if the bill had not been passed. So I think passing the bill would undermine those efforts to promote independent living.
Conor Lynott, thank you so much for sharing with us this morning.
Thank you
really
so much
appreciate
for
it.
having me.
Thank you. Now, our next speaker is from Wales, and as I mentioned before, she was a Welsh Woman of the Year in 1996. She's one of Europe's leading palliative care consultants. She's also a crossbench peer in the UK House of Lords, where she's opposed efforts to introduce legislation for assisted suicide over the last 20 years. She's patron of the Motor Neuron Disease Association, as well as being involved in a number of other relevant charities to this issue. Baroness Ilora Finlay of Llandaff. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. You're very welcome.
Yes. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I have put a few slides together just to illustrate some points. I'm going to try to share my screen now, if everyone can bear with me just for a moment while I do, and we'll get the slideshow going. I want to talk to you from the perspective of somebody who has been looking at whether you legislate on any issue and how you legislate, because that's something I've learned since I've been in Parliament. But my background, as you said, was palliative care. Conor has made some very, very important points, and I think I will probably be stressing some of those too. First of all, dignity. Cicely Saunders said dignity is having a sense of personal worth. Dignity is something which you can either enhance or you can destroy by the way somebody is behaved towards. If you make patients feel like they're on a conveyor belt or a lump of meat, you take away their dignity. If you treat them with respect and look at the things that they need, you enhance their dignity. And Cicely also said, you matter because you are you, and you matter to the last moment of your life. We will do all we can not only to help you die peacefully, but also live until you die. That has been the philosophy of palliative care ever since it really started in these islands. I've just recently written a book, which some of you may have come across, because there are there's a lot of heat and slogan around this topic, but what we tried to do was really analyze it and stand back and say, this is a very complicated subject. I think the first question that you need to ask yourself is, does the law need to change? And if you change it, is what will come in its place better than what you had before? And one of the big concerns here is that we have suicide prevention policies everywhere, and the whole of our clinical services are meant to look at preventing suicide. And all of a sudden, with legislation like this, you say, well, however, there's a group who can say they want to have their life ended by somebody else, help with suicide, and we make a hole in those suicide prevention laws for them, but the group is really poorly defined and it relates to whether they ask for it or not. I also want to quickly point out that stopping treatment is not euthanasia. And sticking with the suicide just for a moment, it's important to be clear, in all the places that have changed their legislation, there is no drop in their suicide rates. In fact, they tend to go up and be very high. There's also no drop in their violent suicides, and there's no drop in their suicides amongst people who have an underlying illness. Those haven't disappeared. They've plateaued, but they haven't gone away. So changing the law does not stop people who are ill committing suicide or killing themselves or seeking help to be killed. But what it does is you change the tone in society so that killing people somehow becomes more acceptable. Why do people seek death? Well, as Conor said, the Oregon data where it's assisted suicide shows it is about being less able to engage in activities that make life enjoyable and being a burden on family or caregivers. Those are the top reasons. Those are social reasons. They're not medical reasons. Way down the list, second from the bottom, is inadequate control of pain or concern about it. And I would remind all of you who are doctors on this call that pain is multifactorial and is an experience of physical stimulus to pain made worse by social, emotional, and spiritual anguish. If you feel that you're a burden, you feel your pain worse. If you're unhappy, your pain feels worse to you. Your pain experience is total. But it's worth noting, this is not the reason that people are seeking death by and large, although the campaigners would have the slogans and get people to vote in a poll using pain and fear of pain as the lever. Let's just look for a moment whether stopping treatment when it's no longer doing any good is euthanasia. It is not. Let's take motor neurone disease, but you could take chemotherapy. For example, the person would have died of their disease without their treatment, without the intervention. If someone has non-invasive ventilation with motor neurone disease, and it's quite common now, and it will keep them well and able to do things with the different devices that they have, they're dependent on the ventilator. When they say, I accept that I'm now dying, I can do no more, I want to come off the ventilator, they die of their underlying disease, and those looking after them must provide care during that time. And we know how to do it. We know how to keep people gently, peacefully slipping away, and they die, but they die much later than they would have died without the intervention. They're accepting that they're going to die of their disease anyway. Completely different to seeking death, when you want to have lethal drugs with the intention to end your life, when your own death might have been months or years later. And I caution anyone who thinks we can predict how long somebody will live, because we can't. We are hopeless at prognosis. I've looked after thousands and thousands of patients, and all I can tell you is I can't tell how long someone's going to live. I've got people who I thought would be dead within weeks, and they've been alive years later. I've also sadly had people who I thought would live for a year or two, and they've died very rapidly. We just can't tell. So what's happened in other countries? Well, I only put these graphs in just to show you the trend. In all the places that have changed the law, the numbers go up and up and up. Canada, interestingly, down the bottom where the red graphs are, is not revealing its data now. That steep rise, that incremental extension, they're trying to extend it in law even further, but they're keeping their data out of sight, which is really worrying. And we know that even when you look at the data reported, there are shortcomings. The estimate is that from Belgium, for example, only 40% or so that are going on. They're not reported at all. If we look at it on a UK basis, the Netherlands, Belgian experience, which is a bit similar to this law before you, it's not a small number. It'd be about 1 in 24 of all deaths. Now, for the UK, that would be about 23,000. I haven't done the sums for Ireland, but I don't think it would be that difficult to take all of your deaths and say, well, what would the numbers be if it was 1 in 24 of all the deaths here? Because that's what's happened. On the Netherlands graph, you will have noticed it had plateaued a bit, and that's the level that they're at now. Are there unintended consequences? Yes, there are. An article in the Washington Post just in the last few days said Canada is plunging toward a human rights disaster for disabled people, that the laws are leading to inadequate care. And the picture of the man in the bed is sadly somebody who felt he had to go to court to try to get the care that he needed to live well with his disability. And the answer he got was that what he needed wouldn't be funded, but that he could have lethal drugs. And we've seen the same happen in Oregon and other places. The other thing is that we know now that there are some hospices that have lost their funding, and that actually palliative care in all these jurisdictions has not developed as much as it has in other parts of the world. And whilst I have huge respect for palliative care in Ireland, I do think you have a bit of a way to go with your service provision. It's not everywhere. It's not 24/7 everywhere. And you just don't have enough clinical staff yet trained, and neither are there in the UK. There are very good services where the services are, but there are gaps. And those need to be addressed before you even think about changing the law in this direction. And there's also moral injury to the staff. It takes its toll. Nobody should underestimate that. What does this do to society? What does it do to the attitude of the doctors? We know, because the Oregon do produce their data, that some doctors seem to prescribe very readily. And there's doctor shopping goes on. So people will move around to get someone to prescribe their lethal drugs. You've got this bill before you. Well, you could shoot holes in just about every line of it. But to say, is somebody terminally ill? You just can't tell. Take somebody like Baroness Campbell, who has, since the age of 15, been deemed to be terminally ill. She's now, I think, 56. She's on a ventilator in her wheelchair, comes into the House of Lords on her ventilator, speaks in debates, and on Monday, she's probably going to call a vote on the domestic abuse bill, trying to protect people from domestic abuse. She has been terminally ill for the whole of her life. The number of times that we've all thought that she wouldn't last a day or two has been more than the fingers I've got on both hands. How do you judge somebody has a clear and settled intention? Well, a very interesting study published just in the last few days has shown that actually people's desire for death vacillates. It goes between seeking death, wanting death, accepting death, and then wanting to live, and having great joy, even in some small moments. And it is at least a year before you can say that somebody's intention is settled. And even then, it's probably 2 years. It's an interesting study to look at. Obviously, there are all kinds of implications politically because of the way the bill's worded, but that, I'm afraid, is something which I'm going to stand back from completely. But what do you actually do? The public out there think, well, you have one pill and you take it, and it almost like the cyanide pill that was sewn into the petticoat of the resistance people in the Second World War. Well, taking cyanide is a terrible way to die, actually. That's not what it is. You have to take a whole stack of drugs. And interestingly, if you were to dissolve it, it would be about a large tumbler full, almost like a half pint glass, a beer glass full, to dissolve it all. And you drink that down. In Oregon, where they have produced the data, they've had some patients, I think it's 8 at the latest count, have woken up again. And it isn't that you die within 5 or 10 minutes. Sometimes it's gone on for over 100 hours. Now, what is assistance? And how do you judge whether assistance to take it is coercive assistance? Oh, come on, mum, it's about time you took your drugs. They're there in the cupboard. We've been holding them onto them for a bit. The worn out family, the people who really feel it's a burden. But then what about the drugs that are used in euthanasia that are injected? Now, this is really very worrying too, because it's a short acting anesthetic agent. And then the person is totally paralyzed with curare. It's the same as used in executions, lethal drugs in executions in the US. And the person who's completely paralyzed can't move a muscle, they can't breathe, they die of asphyxia. We don't know whether they wake up again or not, but a post-mortem study on some of these patients shows that actually their lungs are filled with fluid. It's as if they're drowned in their own secretions. So this isn't a gentle, peaceful death. It just looks peaceful because they can't move a muscle and they're paralyzed. Some people die before they have the curare in, but the protocols that are used for administering them are really worrying. And then these bits of legislation talk about a cooling off period of 14 days and that it could be shortened to 6 days. Well, I don't want to sound too flippant, but I bought a fridge recently and the cooling off day, I had 28 days to cool off just for buying a fridge. The evidence is that in 14 days or even in 6 days, you'd have to work really intensively with somebody to get on top of all of their problems. It's setting an unrealistic boundary. And it's too dangerous because people switch between wanting to die and wanting to live. And I've had countless patients who have said, I feel terrible, I don't want to carry on. And within a few days have said, I never believed I could feel so well again. I never believed I could enjoy life again. So this is really dangerous, what's being proposed. And I don't think that it's wise for the population to go down this route and say, well, we'll have suicide prevention policies for some, but not others. And these are the drugs that we'll administer without even being honest with the population about what the process actually involves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baroness Ilora Finlay, for sharing with us, and I hope you can stay for some of the rest of the conference. If you've just joined us, you're very welcome to End of Life Matters, the conference from Hope Ireland. We're going to have some time for questions, so if you want to submit a question, you can use the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen. But it's now time for our panel discussion with a number of medical experts who are going to respond to some of the things that Baroness Finlay has said, and also explore the Irish context of this issue. Our panel chair is Dr. Miriam Colleran, who completed specialist palliative medicine training in Ireland and is a consultant in palliative medicine in St. Bridget's Hospice and Naas General Hospital. And because it's Seachtain na Gaeilge, and I've heard she speaks fluent Irish, I'm going to say dig with, Miriam?
Oh, Pádraig,
Over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks very much, Steve.
Yeah.
So I suppose we're all palliative care doctors here. We're all palliative care doctors here, and it's wonderful to get to chat with you all. But what is palliative care? Sarah, would you like maybe to share with us what palliative care is? Oh,
Yeah.
Apologies. My gosh, I'm so sorry. I should introduce you first. Oh dear, I need more tea. Dr. Sarah McLean is a consultant in palliative medicine, and she trained in Ireland and London and New York, and is currently working in St. Vincent's Private Hospital. And Dr. Faith Cranfield is a consultant in palliative medicine, again trained in Ireland and Australia, and St. Francis Hospice, Blanchardstown, and Connolly Hospital are extremely lucky to have her working there with them. I'm so sorry, guys. I know them so well. I automatically jumped into having a chat. I'm so sorry. Apologies. So Sarah, you were going to share with us what palliative, and of course, Ilora has kindly is staying with us as well to discuss, which is wonderful. Sarah, would you explain to us what palliative care is?
Gosh, thanks, Miriam. And Baroness Ilora, thank you for an amazing talk. That was really so inspiring and interesting. And Miriam, I suppose, like, we all know what palliative care, palliative medicine is, but I suppose how I explain it to my patients is that we are, you know, we look after patients' physical symptoms and look after their day-to-day quality of life, of course. We're really not only about the patient, we're really about the people minding them, their family and loved ones. And I think what sets palliative medicine apart sometimes is that we're focused on the day-to-day, but I think an important part of what we do is we think about what is meaningful and important to the patient themselves, and think about the future. And a lot of what I emphasize with my patients is that we're here to work with them to think about their goals, what they want their care to look like, and how we can work with all the other doctors and people looking after them to achieve that. And that's how I sum it up to my patients when I meet them for the first time.
Oh, very good. And what drew you to palliative care as a speciality, Sarah?
Well, I suppose I started in my very early training. I was working in haematology and in a bone marrow transplant unit, and I found it incredibly difficult to see patients going through these really, really difficult treatments that weren't always successful. And I suppose I was just drawn to the communication piece and getting to know families. And I didn't like the lab so much. So that kind of was what drew me to palliative care. And I think the thing that I love about palliative care is that, you know, I think every subspecialty now thinks that they can do things that other people can't. But I suppose in palliative medicine, really, when all is lost and people think there's nothing else that can be done, we can say, well, actually, you know, there's always something that we can do. And I think that's what makes it so satisfying for me.
Oh, wonderful. And Ilora, may I ask you what drew you to palliative?
Well, actually fairly similarly, but I'm of the days before the specialty existed. And I decided to jump ship from pediatrics and general practice because I was angry at seeing bad care. That's what drove me. And I wanted to do something about it. And so I became the first consultant in Wales, and the rest has gone on from there. But I thought if we could change things a little bit in one place, we could be like the ripples on the pond and improve it. I was inspired by Cicely Saunders. Yes. If I might just say, though, I think that something very important happened in the last year during COVID. Palliative care has completely come of age. People suddenly realise there isn't any certainty. There is uncertainty across the whole of medicine. You have young people come in and just die in front of doctors' eyes. Sure. And you have other people who they've struggled with and thought, we're not going to get this person through, but they keep trying. And lo and behold, they do come through. Yes. But in that, palliative care has been working in parallel with these other services, teaching them how to break bad news gently, how to deal with a young parent dying, leaving a child bereaved. And all of those lessons have suddenly been picked up across healthcare because the message is, we just don't know what's going to happen. We try our best, but we don't chuck the towel in on patients and give up on them.
Sure, sure. It really has, the COVID pandemic really has brought uncertainty to the fore,
Yeah.
and I think it's fair to say that it has raised death awareness and the fragility of life and the unpredictability. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Baroness. And Faith, for you, what drew you to palliative?
I was lucky. Palliative care was somewhat established when I was a medical student. So,
and now you're boasting that you're so much younger than the rest of us.
So I just happened to have a rotation in it. And it was the first time as a medical student that I was encouraged to get to know the person. And that resonated. I wanted to know what made people tick. I was interested in people. That's why I did medicine. What made people tick and what mattered to them. And that essentially is the essence of a palliative care doctor. When I go and meet someone, I'm not there to talk about dying, although they often fear meeting me.
Sure.
In fact, I'm there to go and find out about them, what's important to them, and what can I do to make sure that they're feeling as much themselves as possible. Because the illness will take that away. You know, all of a sudden, you may not be able to go back to work because health has taken over and you're going to hospitals, and you might mind your grandchild, and, you know, you can feel a real sense of loss of yourself. And our job is to try and help people regain that sense of self and that sense of control. And by and large, that is exactly what happens.
Sure.
And so I enjoy that.
Yes, and it's really what I'm hearing from everyone really is about palliative being about helping someone live their best life for as long as possible and as well as possible, and that it's very much tailored to the particular person, to what their hopes and wishes and needs and aspirations are, that it's very much about person-centered care and meeting the patient where they're at. Yeah.
Can I just say, interestingly, when you meet other doctors, they'll all say, you know, why would you do palliative medicine? I mean, you know, you're never going to make them well. You know, you're not going to make a difference. But to me, the difference is palpable. You know, someday one person can't go out for a meal because, well, they can't go out anyway now, but they can't go out for a meal because their nausea is not well controlled. So they can't enjoy a family celebration. I know how to manage nausea. So then they go for their family celebration. It's measurable and it clearly makes a difference.
Sure. Very much focusing on the person as a person. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you all for that. And I suppose the other thing that comes to mind then is, oh, sorry, apologies.
No, I just wanted to add to that, actually, what Faith said, because the other thing is that we're helping people make good memories.
Yes.
So that those who are bereaved, who live with what's happened, don't have bad memories, but they have okay memories. And I've been struck at the number of fast track weddings that palliative care has arranged during COVID.
Sure, sure. Yes, yeah, that's so important because, and I suppose for what you're saying there, Baroness, is so important because we know that loved ones coped better in bereavement when they feel that the person that their deceased loved one, that their symptom control was managed well and that they were as comfortable as possible, but also that their needs and worries were met. Yeah.
And their dignity was enhanced and they were looked after and appreciated as the person of value.
Yes, and of course they are. Absolutely. Every person is of intrinsic value. So I suppose that what's striking me, and I'm very conscious that, and as we all are, that we're discussing here assisted suicide and assisted dying, as it tends to be a global term encompassing assisted suicide and euthanasia. And this bill is specifically Bill om Bos Dignitul. The Dying with Dignity bill is specifically about legalizing assisted suicide and euthanasia, the directive administration of medication by a doctor or actually a nurse under this bill, because it can to a person to hasten their death, to cause them to die. But Faith, I'm mindful that this is actually what you did your MSc dissertation on. Could you share a little bit about that with us, please?
So I did a master's in healthcare ethics and law just because I thought it was interesting. I thought the ethical situations we found ourselves in at work were interesting and challenging. And I hummed and hawed about doing a dissertation on euthanasia and assisted suicide because in reality, it's not something that matters to the vast majority of people that I look after and that I care for. It's not actually relevant to them. It's not something they want. They want to live, but they want to live better than they were when they met me, feeling better. But I just thought, you know, it was in several jurisdictions and it was growing. And I thought that it is associated with end of life and therefore I ought to be well versed on it and understand it better from both sides. So I had instinctive views on it that it was not safe, but I decided to just inform myself and learn about it. Because I'm very much somebody who believes to live and let live, and, you know, and everybody's different and everybody makes their own choices, and that's fine. But I settled at the end of my dissertation on what we've said today, which is that it's just not safe for so many people. So many people are put at risk by introducing this lacuna, this change in the legislation for a very small number of people who could not imagine that there is any other solution to the distress that they find themselves in.
Okay.
And that was my conclusion, but I could go on about it for hours.
Okay. Well, maybe we will go on talk about it a little bit more. And I suppose what's underlying this, what I'm hearing from you all and from everyone so far, and is that this is about, our aim is we want to provide compassionate care for persons who have advanced progressive illness, for persons, well, for all our patients, but in particular, we're discussing today persons with typically who have stage 4 disease, who have incurable illnesses, incurable advanced progressive illnesses, that we want to provide compassionate care for them. But we're healthcare workers, we're all doctors here. So compassionate care, we also want to provide safe patient care. So patient safety has to be of paramount importance to us too. And it's part of that, a really important part of that picture. And I think while we're talking about patient safety, I will just come to a misunderstanding about the use of opiates. That's morphine family medicines in hospice and in palliative care. We've all heard that morphine kills. I even remember my own mother saying to me years ago that morphine caused people to die sooner. And that myth is still out there, unfortunately. Thankfully, there's a lot of research and evidence to show that the use of opioids, and again, that's morphine and morphine family medicines, used properly and used in palliative care, do not hasten death. And I know Hope Ireland are kindly going to share research and literature on their website about this. So given that we know that opiates are safe, are used safely in a hospice and a palliative care context, maybe can we chat about other aspects of patient safety that we're concerned about in terms of assisted suicide and euthanasia? Sarah, would you like to start?
Yeah, thanks, Miriam. And I think, you know, coming back to the inherent flaws in this bill, and I was listening to Gino Kenny, one of the politicians who, you know, who's bringing this bill to, and he keeps saying on the radio, you know, this bill, it needs extensive redrafting, it needs extensive revisions, but like he's acknowledging that the flaws in the bill, you know, which just tells me inherently that he acknowledges himself the flaws in this bill. It is an unsafe bill, and the safeguards in the bill are just not there. You know, there's no requirement for a mental health assessment for patients, you know, no requirement that their depression is managed or their anxiety is managed. Really the capacity, you know, the assessing people to make sure that they have the capacity to make decisions for themselves is not robust, and the oversights built into the bill, you know, there's no mechanism to ensure that even the frequency with which this legislation might be used is reported or you know, scrutinized. So it's just a really unsafe bill, and that's at the level of the bill. And then at the level of the individual patient, you know, this is just such an unsafe practice because, as we've alluded to already, you know, the definition of terminal illness in the bill is just too broad. There's no even prognosis, although obviously prognostication is very difficult, but the definition of terminal illness is too broad. And at the level of the patient, you know, we know that patients feel as though they're a burden, and there are just no safeguards that can be put in place to ensure that patients aren't coerced into requesting this.
Yeah, sadly, I mean, it's something that we all hear as doctors, as nurses, and social workers in palliative care, chaplains. We all sadly hear patients talking about a fear of being a burden to their family and to their loved ones. And we know that the family may feel very, very differently, but there is that fear that patients can have. And I suppose exactly as you're saying there, Sarah, our concern would be that the right to die can become the duty to die when assisted suicide and and euthanasia are legalized. Ilora, would you like to share with us?
Yeah, I think there are also some other dangers which we haven't even mentioned, and that is diagnostic errors. The select committee that I was on heard from the College of Pathologists that at post-mortem, about 1 in 20 people didn't die of what was written on the death certificate and was thought to be a terminal illness. You know, we get things wrong.
Yes.
We get diagnosis wrong. It isn't only prognosis that we've got wrong. I mean, if you like, my longest survivor is somebody who I thought back in 1991 had a prognosis of 3 months.
Sure.
And he sent me a text message a few weeks ago, it was in January actually, to see if I was okay and had escaped COVID.
Isn't that so beautiful? Yeah.
But in the meantime, his own wife died and he had to bring up his 3 children on his own as a single parent.
Yes.
You just can't tell. The other thing is, we in palliative care like to get to know our patients. We want to get to know the family. We still don't know what goes on behind closed doors. And sadly, I've been completely taken in by families sometimes who I thought were loving, caring families, but they weren't so loving when the fixed term life insurance policy ran out. And that,
sure.
You know, or when once the will had been changed.
Sure.
I mean, I'm afraid, you know, and we just don't know. We don't detect that coercion.
Sure. And what you're saying, I think, is so important, and is so important because overt coercion may be picked up, but there is that coercion behind the back doors that we may not pick up at all, and this is irreversible. Ending a person's life, hastening a death is irreversible. It's absolutely, it's a huge worry. Faith, yes?
Yeah, I was going to say, if we go back to coercion,
yes,
if we change the legislation, that's not a coercion, but it is in changing the environment in which somebody is making a decision. So if I temporarily feel, oh my goodness, like I had a lady, okay, she was in her 60s, a strong maternal woman who became less well and needed help as a result of her cancer. And the biggest thing that had been important in that family's life was going to be the wedding of her daughter.
Yes.
And that was all sort of put to one side, and they didn't know whether to talk about it or not talk about it. And sure. she just wanted to be out of the way. She felt she was a burden, and she just was very, very distressed, couldn't talk about it. She wanted to protect them, and really just thought it'd be much better if she just wasn't there at all, and was incredibly distressed.
Yes.
And, you know, once we were able to facilitate a conversation between them and to give it sufficient supports to minimize the impact on the family around her, to make her feel as independent as possible, it was very clear that her daughter didn't want that at all. She would have been devastated.
Sure.
And moved the wedding forward, and they celebrate, like Baroness Ilora said, they moved the wedding forward and they celebrated that. Had the environment in which we lived been, well, you know, that's a perfectly respectable decision and we should follow that, that becomes the goal. That could potentially, you can imagine, become the goal for this lady and take away from everything else.
Yes.
And people rationally will feel, oh yes, we're respecting her, that's fine.
Yes.
But there's such an opportunity for connection and for making memories and for living that's gone.
Yeah, no, but absolutely.
That's not coercion, but it's changing the environment in which you make a decision. And we all know, any marketing person will tell you, the environment in which you are affects the choices that you make.
Sure. I'm hearing about fear, even though we're not naming it, about fear of change and fear of what I suppose our society, and we're embedded in a Western society which very much values independence and actually kind of there's a stigma to looking for help and seeking help and the help of others. Is there something about this in assisted dying and assisted suicide and euthanasia?
I think if we look at the evidence from places, yes, there is. And actually loneliness. I mean, it seems horrific. There are cases of euthanasia which had been because the person wasn't coping with lockdown. Loneliness comes kind of hand in hand with this excessive control and autonomy that we look for because we've forgotten the value of relationships. So I think there is something there that's really very worrying. And the burden of choice, of course, this isn't about choice. It is that you may be offered less choice.
Okay.
Because the choices are less in the care that you get, and you have this hanging over you. When should I go? When should I decide to be dead?
Okay.
Rather than actually, I'm going to carry on living as well as I can, accept the help and support to let me do that. Everyone, I mean, we talk about a right to die. We're all going to die. I'd love to know who's got the right to not die. What you're talking about is you're wanting some people to have a right for somebody else to kill them, yes, or give them the means to commit suicide. Yeah. And we have suicide prevention for good reason. Mm-hmm. And we make a hole in that at our peril.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is really important. And I see Steve has joined us. Steve has joined us. Is it okay, Steve, if we just ask one question in terms of, and it can feed into the Q&A as well. How have you, Ilora, how have you dealt with this from because of course we're embedded in the Irish political system. How have you dealt with this from a UK political perspective?
Well, we've had bills put before us in Parliament, and they've had massive campaigns behind us. The campaigners will carry on. I think the thing that's worrying is that you have a complex problem and the bill is put up as a simplistic solution to a complex problem that runs right across society. And the problem in society is actually, how do we change attitudes to look after people well? How do we value people? We have legislation about equality, about disability rights, but it isn't applied to every single person. We hear about discrimination. We hear about domestic abuse behind closed doors. We hear about elder abuse, financial abuse, and so on. But what we found was when it actually came to it and people went into it in detail, they went, "Ooh, this is too dangerous. This is too dangerous." And so the last time it came before us, it was lost. The vote was lost pretty resoundingly. And I think you do have to say, if you're going to change the law, is what you're going to change it to safer for everybody, because the law must protect the whole population. So we don't actually, all our laws are really protective. And we make holes in them to allow some things.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I might come in here and while you're all there, the first question I'm going to read out is actually just a thanks to all of you from Monia, who said, "I witnessed firsthand the incredible efforts of the palliative care doctors and care team during the last weeks of my mother's life. I want to thank the incredible doctors on this conference today who are standing up for her rights and others like her who want to live with dignity as long as they can." So thank you to all of you for that. There's also a thanks to Conor, which could I just join in congratulating Conor for his extraordinary life and life achievements, and for being so articulate and passionate in expressing our shared concerns in relation to this proposed bill. So thank you to you, Conor. Now, there are so many questions coming in. We're not going to have time for all of them. We will have some time later on also to take questions. But I'd like to push to you. How can we better reach out to people to ensure they don't feel like a burden or become too upset about the debate taking place in the media? Anyone want to take that?
I think that we actually need to be quite upfront and open that there is help and support available, and this is how you get it. And all of the services for people not just palliative care, but all the disability services everywhere, have to say, am I fulfilling my duty to my fellow citizen? Am I available 24/7? Because people hit rock bottom in the night, at bank holidays and weekends, not 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And if you're going to look after somebody, you've got to be available. So actually, that's where we should be putting our efforts and supporting people to live well, because then they can contribute back in society. You know, Baroness Campbell's the absolute classic example. Terminally ill for nearly the whole of her adult life, and yet contributed more to disability rights probably than anybody else. And Tanny Gray-Thompson, who I work with in the House of Lords very closely, who's the Paralympian of all Paralympians, really.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and who spoke to us at the last conference, and her story was really very inspiring, I have to say. Now, I'm keeping an eye on the time, and we are hoping to leave some time at the end of the conference also for Q&A. So we're going to move on now. My thanks to Dr. Miriam Colleran and our panelists, Dr. Faith Cranfield and Dr. Sarah McLean, for that very informative discussion, and with Baroness Ilora Finlay on some of the medical implications of any legislation around euthanasia and assisted suicide. Now, if you've just joined us, you're very welcome, and we're up to 450 people participating in the conference just right at the moment. My name is Steve Johnson. I'm going to talk about the next hour, the second hour of our conference now. Our speakers include a man who has dedicated his career to protecting vulnerable people from euthanasia and assisted suicide. We're also going to be joined by a lady whose name is synonymous with suicide prevention in Ireland. And very shortly, I'm going to be talking to the mother of a Kerry teenager who, while battling terminal cancer, made an impassioned plea on national television to his own generation to live life to the full. But first, we're going to watch a short video recorded yesterday with an inspirational person and a close friend of Hope Ireland. Her name is Kathleen Rogers, who has motor neuron disease.
Well, the reaction was very positive, overwhelmingly so. Yeah, it was brilliant. It's a great reaction I got from those people. And what was really interesting would be one or two people actually said to me that they were a bit undecided about the issue, or even thought that assisted suicide was okay until they saw the video, and that made them think again, because they didn't realize kind of the complexities involved in the issue. But by what I said, that made a difference to me. So I was really pleased with that. And then the online comments were, again, a lot of positive comments, and people wishing me well and encouraged me. That was really lovely for me. And obviously, not everybody agreed with what I had to say, but that was fair enough. At least I appreciated that these people took the time to watch the video and to listen to me and even to respond. So yeah, it was all good. Okay, well, I mean, if you just take that term, dying with dignity, nobody would disagree with that. I mean, we all would wish for that at the end of our days, and we wish it for others. And the differences arise when we ask the question, how do you die with dignity? And some people would answer through assisted suicide. Other people would say, definitely not that way. And I actually think it's quite sad that some people think the only way to die with dignity is to kill themselves or to have other people do it for them, when you think of it. And I think this must reflect on how they live, not just, how they died. They must feel that their lives have no dignity up to that point, or they fear their lives will have no dignity after that point. So maybe there should be more debate around that, like how we can support these people to find a dignity in their life, no matter what kind of illness they're going through, or mental anguish or fear or whatever. So maybe that's one way of looking at it. I mean, at the end of the day, I think dignity it's largely up to yourself. It's something internal, inner dignity, and it's not something that can be legislated for.
Oh.
And well, first of all, the positive side of it is that people like yourself and Hope Island and other groups and individuals have given me a voice, which is great, which is wonderful, and have let me say how I feel about it. That's really good. The negative side about the whole thing, to be honest, is sometimes the whole debate just pulls me down and depresses me. And I think it's largely because I find myself in this group of so-called qualifying persons group. And I feel like I'm divided off by the vast majority of people in this society, by myself and people with similar conditions. We're all kind of corralled together and told that we can qualify, that we do qualify to end our lives if we want to, and if we can get help to do that. Whereas people on the other side of the fence are given the total opposite message. So the message I receive is that my life has less value and less worthwhile than others. Because if I want to end it, there's no problem and I'll actually be helped to do it. Whereas those non-qualifying people are given the message that under no circumstances should you even consider suicide. And not alone will we not help you do it, we will do everything to dissuade you from it or even prevent you from it. And they're being told that their life is precious, their life is worthwhile, and that if they can't see it themselves, that there is help for them, so they will come to see it. You know, and that suicide is never an answer to any of their difficulties. So it's that kind of a message that's coming across, and the proponents of this bill and their supporters and those who voted for it up to this point, whether they actually realize it or not, that's what they're saying to me. And that's very upsetting for me, you know, to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would encourage anybody with their own story to come forward, because it's important, I think, that to give that perspective that nobody else can actually give, and somebody who is in this situation themselves. Having said that, I'd be a bit cautious, because I would hate to think anyone would feel under pressure to do that, you know, because I know myself dealing with a serious illness like this, it's a lot. So I wouldn't want people to feel obliged to come forward, and especially as the issue itself is so sensitive. But one thing I would say is maybe people wouldn't realize that they don't have to necessarily do videos or interviews if they want to contribute to the debate. They can just simply send a few thoughts into Hope Island, say, or contact them for chat, you know. So it doesn't have to be a big commitment, but it all helps. Everybody's individual thoughts, stories, whatever's in their mind, I think will help with the whole debate, and making it clear to outsiders, I mean to other people, what it's really like to be in this situation. Yeah.
Yes, that's Kathleen Rogers, and what an amazingly kind of articulate explanation of her own situation and her perspective on this issue. Now, I know that Kathleen is attending the conference today, so Kathleen, I'd really like to thank you for sharing your story and giving your personal perspective on the issues that we're discussing today, and really kind of help to put a context to the issues that we're discussing today. Now, Kathleen mentioned the video that that she had shared for Hope Ireland and has been viewed so many times. So we're actually going to share that video. It's just short, a couple of minutes, and we're going to show that now.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Rogers, and I have motor neuron disease. This puts me, of course, in the category of terminally ill people, someone the Dying with Dignity Bill is designed for. But I don't want it. I object to the name, first of all, as it suggests that shortening our life is the only way for a terminally ill person to die with dignity. This is not true. I intend to live out my life to its natural end. This end will be difficult, I'm under no illusion, but I have faith that the support, care and respect I currently receive from the health professionals, the palliative care team from the hospice, and from my family and friends will continue for as long as I need it. I will live out my life to its natural end, and then I will die with dignity. You may say, fair enough, but why deny others this right? The truth is that such a decision to avail of assisted suicide cannot be taken in isolation. There will be knock-on consequences for all of society. Our medical profession, those trained to preserve life, will be turned on its head. Regarding the law, with this bill, the state will be sanctioning the death of a certain section of the population. What message would that give me and those like me, especially those struggling with feelings of being a burden on others? I think the message would be, your lives don't matter as much as others. We will not waste time trying to encourage you to seek a better option. Go ahead and end your life if you want. So, I would ask our politicians not to vote for any bill which seeks to introduce assisted suicide or euthanasia. In the meantime, speak to people like me, those in the medical profession, and those involved in hospice care. We can tell the story from another perspective, one that needs to be heard.
Thank you, Kathleen. Now, our next speaker has experienced end-of-life care from the perspective, a perspective that really no mother would ever want to, and that's because she's the parent of a teenage boy who had cancer. Now, her son, Donald Walsh, died in May 2013, and he had a positive message for his generation, which was to live life to the full. And in carrying on his legacy, my guest has become a strong advocate for patients' rights and also for suicide prevention among the young. Elma Walsh of the Donald Walsh Live Life Foundation, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Are you there, Elma? How are you?
Good.
I can hear you, I can't see you.
I know, yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Anyway, yeah, first of all, Elma, I've heard lots about Donald's story, and it's easy for me to assume that everyone knows his story, but could you tell us briefly about his life?
Donald was like any other young person, in all honesty. He, I see it now. He was like any other young person, in all honesty. He loved his football, he loved his rugby, he loved his sports, and, you know, he was quite bright going to school. He lived a normal life up to when he was 12 years old. At 12, he got cancer on his leg, an osteosarcoma, and he dealt with it. You know, he dealt with it fairly well, and it was a learning curve for us, and it was a learning curve for him as well, because we didn't have cancer in the family before, so it was all a new terminology and medical terminology that we had to go through and everything. And but he got on with it, and he came through it. He got the operation, had an operation in the leg, went through the chemotherapy and everything, and he survived it for he didn't get cancer again for about 3 years after that. And it was after he had lung cancer then, and again we went through it again, the chemotherapy, an operation again where some of his lungs removed, and he was 15 at that stage. He was 12 when he first got cancer. He was 15 at that stage. And so it was more, we knew more about it, knew more what was going to happen and what was going on and everything at that stage. So Yeah, he lived a normal life the same as anybody else. He was told in October, then he got the lung cancer in February, and then in October he was told that he had a lot more tumours, so that's when things got more serious.
Yeah. Really, his obviously he came to prominence. We're going to show a short video that I think that the family has put together of him, but just maybe as we're lining up,
this video.
Maybe you can say a little bit about it.
Made by students in County Dublin, and it kind of recaps the story about Donald, and that's the video that we show.
Okay.
God has given me this challenge, but I may be used as a symbol for other people to appreciate life more.
Your bare feet down the hallway. I remember your lids on laugh, race cars on the kitchen floor, plastic dinosaurs. I love you to the moon and back. I remember your blue eyes looking into mine, like we had our own secret club. I remember you dancing before bedtime, then jumping on me.
I'm Donald, I'm 16, on the 15th of February 2012. I was diagnosed with cancer for the second time in my life.
And even in the moment I knew you fought it hard like an army guy. Remember I leaned in and whispered to you, come on baby with me, we're gonna fly away from here.
I've kind of always done that, kind of not sit down and wallow in my sorrows, like there's no point, like crying's not gonna get me anywhere. It's as if even from this illness now that I have, I cried the first day and I promised myself that was it, because it's not going to get me anywhere, it's not going to make me any happier, it's not going to make the next few months any easier. Like,
flowers piled up in the worst way, no one knows what to say about a beautiful boy who died, and it's about to be Halloween. You could be anything you wanted if you were still here. I remember the last day when I kissed your face.
I just didn't want them to see suicide as a solution to any of life's problems. It hurts me to see them think about it, to see it among their friends. But it kills me because I'm here fighting for my life for the third time. I've no say in anything. And I'm still here waking up every day. And then they think that they have a problem and this might be a solution. That does make me angry, and I'm not gonna lie about it. Like I've nothing against people with mental illness or anything like that. These people have to realise that there is help.
Several thousand people attended the funeral of Donald Walsh in Tralee, County Kerry today. The 16-year-old died at the weekend following a battle with cancer. Mourners were told not to forget his powerful words, that life is a precious gift and irreplaceable.
And what if I really thought some miracle would see us through? But what if the miracle was even getting one moment with you?
Oh, the summertime is coming, and the trees are sweetly blooming, where the wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather. Would you go? I thought the Donald Walsh documentary was really inspirational, and it taught me not to take anything for granted and just to live life to the full.
I think what Donald Walsh tried to teach us was that, like, sometimes you need to just get on with life and stop wallowing in your own self-pity, and like, he was a real good big role model for teens our age. Like,
I found it heartbreaking but inspirational to see the effect that he had on young people. The documentary really affected me because I saw that someone who knew the time was limited, was so positive about life, and he lived it to the full.
Crystal fountain, and around it I will place all the colors of the mountain. Would you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together where the wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather.
Deeply spiritual.
Heartbreaking yet uplifting.
Courageous.
Like an angel.
Moving.
Fearless.
Inspirational. Sad but heartwarming.
Down the hallway, I love you to the moon and back.
Wow. Powerful video, Elma, and just a message has come in. Elma and the Walsh family are a true inspiration. Thank you, Elma, for everything you have done and continue to do to promote Donald's message. And Elma, just we're talking about this this bill, and I suppose you have two particular perspectives on it. You know, one is in relation to your work with, I suppose, getting across a message to vulnerable young people, you know, to live life to the full, and the other is having experienced palliative care. But how would you kind of think that the availability of assisted suicide would affect the message you're trying to get across to young people?
Well, I think it would be, the wording of it would be wrong for a start, and they wouldn't, you know, they just see the headlines. They wouldn't go into detail about it much or anything like that. And I think it's very important to stress the headlines. Like every doctor there, and everybody that spoke there this morning, including Conor and everybody, they went into great depth and everything that that young people wouldn't go into unless it was totally explained to them. And you really have to go around and speak to young people in general to explain the implications that are there for them, and how life can be undermined, I suppose, really. You know.
The other thing, having kind of gone through a long road with Donald, you saw him suffer a lot. So what would you say to the person who says, I just don't want to see my loved one suffer?
Yeah, well, you know, when Donald was first diagnosed terminal, I'm going to kind of personalize what every doctor there said this morning, because it all rang bells with me. When he was first diagnosed, we had to meet the palliative care doctor in Tralee, a lovely lady, Dr. Patricia Sheehan. And I, to be honest with you, myself included, I was in no hurry to meet her, because I had this impression in my head that I was meeting the person who was going to help my son to die, and I didn't want to meet that person. But I can safely say that after meeting her and the group of people over in palliative care in Tralee, you know, that I've made friends for life there. They're absolutely brilliant. They helped us in every single step of the way. They allayed our fears of what was going to be ahead of us. You know, we had our own ideas and things, but they kind of put them into words and everything. And when Finbar asked her what you're using, what he said, when will the time be that what you're using to treat Donald will be that which will cause his death? And she replied, and she said, I'm managing your son's pain, and that's my job. You know, that was the palliative care doctor's job, and they took exceptional care of Donald, and they were second to none. But it is over the years since then, we've met a lot of people that have been through palliative care, and they have the same experience, that the palliative care team looked after all their worries, all their stresses, and all their little things that they were worried about. And at the time, Tralee only had a day unit. They didn't have an overnight unit that they have now. And so when his medication was changed to methadone, and you were talking about drugs there earlier on, with drugs, living with drugs, that people die with drugs. Donald lived with drugs. Donald went to nightclubs, and he went to rugby matches and football matches with methadone in his pocket to take it, you know, when the time was right to take it. So he had to go to Marymount, so we experienced Marymount Hospice as well. And they couldn't do enough for him there, even making sure that they put Cocoa Pops and burritos on the menu for him. But we went to Cork CUH for radiation. And again, it was some of the time it was difficult for Donal. But the nurses and doctors there gave him this time, and they spoke to him and they treated him with the utmost respect. And from dealing with palliative care and medical teams from Dublin, Cork and Tralee, the one thing that they all did was reassure Donal, and he knew that his worries and fears were top priority to them. Mm. While end of life for your child is not a thing that any parent wants to go through, and knowing that life isn't perfect, it certainly made it easier knowing that palliative care teams across the country will help the patient and the family fulfill some of the ambitions in the short time that they have left.
Mm-hmm. Elma, I could ask you so many questions, and there's so many things that I'd like to ask you, but just with the time in the conference, I'd love if you could stay for the Q&A, and we may be able to put more questions to you. But I'd just like to really just thank you for coming on today and sharing on this issue, because you've so much to give, and even though I'm sure it's not easy for you having to kind of rewatch so many times, you know, something that was a real, you know, just such a painful time for you. I have to say that one of the most satisfying things for me in my job as a radio journalist is meeting people like you, because our country is full of people like you who experience tragedy and turn it around for the good of others, and it's just it's just one of the best things about this country. It's something that I'm very proud of. It's a beautiful thing to see. So thank you for all that you do, and I'm sure I'm saying that on behalf of everyone joining us today. Thank you, Elma.
Just try to benefit people in different ways that they can move on with their lives and their stories.
Yes. Thanks, Elma. Now, our next guest is joining us from Canada. He's the executive director and co-founder of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, which was established in Canada in 1998. And in 2007, he became the chairperson of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition International. He's spoken at conferences all around the world, including Hope Ireland's inaugural conference back in 2015. He's also written the book, Exposing Vulnerable People to Euthanasia and Assisted Suicide, which was published in 2012. So Alex Schadenberg, you're welcome back to Ireland.
I'm pleased to be with you, and my sound is fine.
It's good, thanks.
Excellent. I'm going to put up a PowerPoint slides. Great. And with the information, I was told I'm going to be talking about the information related to what's happening in North America. Well, there's a fair amount of information related to North America, so obviously this is a big topic, and this is a very difficult person to follow as a presenter. To follow the last presentation is very difficult. Nonetheless, what we need to know about what's going on, I'm just going to give you some of the stats. Some of the stats Ilora already had mentioned, and this is important to point out that this does overlook. But the fact is that Canada is not actually producing up-to-date statistics, so it's very hard to follow this. And yet, at the same time, at this very moment, Canada is the best example, or in other ways look at it, the worst example of what you might call a slippery slope or incremental extensions, or just, how would you say, the law which is just constantly growing. And the fact is that Canada legalized euthanasia in June of 2016, and it was euthanasia and assisted suicide, but in fact, almost all the deaths are done by lethal injection. So what we have then is, in a very, very short time, so in less than 4 years, our government introduced a new bill to expand the law. So when I show you the data that was shown, which is the same as what Ilora showed you, there had been 13,946 medically assisted deaths, which is the term they like to use, or MAID term they like to use, by December 31st, 2019. We don't have the up-to-date data. I'm estimating, based on data I received from Ontario and a few other places, that there's been more than 21,000 already. We have grown incredibly fast in Canada, and it's a very sad story to say that. So what happened is that we're already talking about expanding the law. So we have a situation where the original law said that someone had to be terminally ill. It used this term that one's natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. But then in September, October of 2019, Quebec Superior Court decision in the Truchon case struck down the part of the law saying that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. So that means people wouldn't have to be terminally ill anymore. And they gave the government 6 months to change the law. In fact, the government has not finished that yet, and Quebec has just extended that decision, continues to extend that decision. But what was crazy is, of course, you don't have a review of the law that's happened. You have a lower court decision. The Superior Court is not the higher court, right? You have a lower court decision striking down a part of the law, and the government didn't appeal that. And I'm going to go on further with this. So now they're talking about this Bill C7, and that would remove that this natural death must be reasonably foreseeable in the law, which is the terminal illness requirement. But it was never really a terminal illness requirement because the law never actually defined natural death must be reasonably foreseeable. They never defined that. So this was sort of a murky term that had multiple meanings. And because physicians might have different interpretations of that, it was interpreted very different, for instance, in British Columbia than it would be, let's say, interpreted in Newfoundland or Prince Edward Island. So the Bill C7 also expands this, that someone who's not capable of consenting, if they pass this bill, someone who's not capable of consenting could die by euthanasia if they had been previously approved. So what that means is if someone has been approved for euthanasia, for lethal injection, and then let's say they had a stroke and now they're not capable of consenting anymore, the bill says they could go ahead and do the act. Bill C7 waives the waiting period. So currently the bill says there's a 10-day waiting period. Bill C7 would waive that waiting period, meaning that somebody who's been approved for euthanasia could die the same day. So as I say, this means a same-day death. Now, a lot of people haven't talked about this, but there's been a lot of research done on this whole question of the will to live. And a lot of that research was done here in Canada, actually, by a psychiatrist named Harvey Chochinov. His studies are worth reading because he proves clearly that for almost everyone who says they want to die, their will to live will fluctuate. And he goes through significant research and data into that. So what this means, though, is if you get rid of the waiting period, one's bad day becomes their last day. The bill creates a two-track law. So the government said, well, if you don't have to be terminally ill, we'll have a 90-day waiting period for those who aren't terminally ill or who aren't dying, but we'll have no waiting period for those who, quote, quote, are dying. So it creates this, what you call a natural inequality within the law, that there'd be a 90-day waiting period. Now remember, the law allows euthanasia for physical or psychological suffering. Psychological suffering could be a type of mental illness or chronic psychological issues. So when you consider the Canadian healthcare system, and psychiatrists have been saying this over and over again, it often takes more than 90 days to get a referral for psychiatric care, and yet you could die within 90 days if you're not terminally ill if you get approved for euthanasia. So that's a sort of a crazy dichotomy within the Canadian system if this bill passes. So what happened is the bill passed in Parliament, then it went to the Canadian Senate, and the Senate amended the bill. So the Senate then said, well, the bill doesn't actually go far enough. So they decided to amend the bill in several ways. One was they added that one could die for reasons of mental illness alone, so psychological suffering, but they said mental illness was a reasonable reason to die by euthanasia. Now remember, there's a 90-day waiting period if you're not terminally ill, but dying by mental illness alone. Now let's put this in perspective. In the Netherlands and Belgium, they do allow euthanasia for mental illness, but the protocol around the act, they stayed in their protocol, and the protocols, as you know, aren't always followed. We know that by the studies. Nonetheless, the protocol says that to do a euthanasia of someone, there has to be at least a 1-year period between the request and the death, and that the person requesting euthanasia for issues around mental illness or psychological suffering or chronic mental issues, that they must try all medical treatment. So in the Netherlands and Belgium, the protocol says that if someone says no to medical treatment or an effective type of medical treatment, that would be taken as also that they do not qualify for lethal injection. Whereas the Canadian Bill C7 says you wouldn't have to try medical treatment. If you want to die and you get approved, that would be fine. You could be dead within 90 days in the 90-day period. So what's going on in Canada is this whole thing is now being further debated, and it's going on, and I'm hoping in the end it all gets defeated. but the government is pretty committed to this concept of expanding the law. Now, I mentioned in the earlier slide, and I didn't go into it, the original law legalizing euthanasia had a little caveat in it saying that there had to be what they call a 5-year review of the law. And I guess they did that because there was quite a few members of parliament who were uncomfortable with euthanasia. So they said, well, if your concerns are correct, we will do a review of the law. And that review of the law was supposed to start in June of 2020. There has been no review of the law, and yet the government is considering expanding euthanasia to include mental illness alone, and yet there's still been no review of the law. They're now talking about reviewing the law after they expand the law, which once again makes no sense. So what's going on in the US? Well, the US, assisted suicide has become legal in quite a few states now. It's California, Colorado, Hawaii, Maine, New Jersey, Oregon, Vermont, Washington State, and the District of Columbia. So you have quite a few states that have legalized assisted suicide. And but what you need to know, which is a more important thing, is also legal technically in Montana. Montana, the law doesn't allow assisted suicide, but the Baxter court decision approved assisted suicide based on a defensive consent. So I'm not going to get into the particulars. What it means is assisted suicide is permitted in Montana based on a court decision. But assisted suicide bills are now being debated in almost 20 states right now this year in the US. And you have to understand that every year there's been about 20 states that have debated assisted suicide bills, and almost every year these bills get defeated. So for instance, you have the one year that California legalized assisted suicide, which is it's a massive state. So I understand that's a significant situation. Nonetheless, that same year, assisted suicide had been defeated in approximately 20 states. And for instance, in 2017, there was 26 states that debated assisted suicide bills, and all those bills were defeated that year. So when you consider this, it's not like everybody's just deciding we're going to legalize this. This is a major debate in the US right now. But what's also going on in the US right now is the expansion of assisted suicide. So when we're talking about data out of Oregon and Washington State, it's also important to talk about the expansion that they're talking about. So why am I saying this? Well, the other side says, well, there isn't any slippery slope. There's no reason to be worried. Look at Oregon, look at Washington State. There's no reason to be worried. But right now, at this moment, they've been expanding these laws. So they've said, well, we've had it legal for a while. It's time to expand it. So one of the ways they're expanding it is they're eliminating waiting periods. So for instance, the Washington State law has a 15-day waiting period, and they're planning to replace that with a 72-hour waiting period, but then they're saying that waiting period can be waived so that there would be no waiting period in certain circumstances. And so they're also expanding who can do the act. So for instance, the Washington State bill for expansion, right now physicians can approve assisted suicide because prescribe the lethal drugs. Now they're going to expand that to include advanced registered nurses, nurse practitioners that is, and also licensed physician assistants. So this is totally different. They're also going to expand who can counsel. Now the laws don't require counseling, but when one's mental capacity is questioned. So for instance, in the state of Washington State, when a doctor would say that there's questionable capacity, then there's supposed to be counseling done in order to determine the capacity. Well, they're expanding, of course, who can do that counseling. This also, the Washington State bill will allow the drugs to be delivered by the mail. It could be delivered by etc. And I bring this up as an issue, not because, but what it means is that they're delivering lethal drugs, controlled substances through the mail to people to die by assisted suicide. And if you consider what's going on during COVID, when there's been a lot of lockdowns, a lot of people have been ordering their products over the mail, and they're receiving it, and it's being stolen from their doorsteps. And we know that this is a serious problem. Nonetheless, this is where they're going. We have to understand how these laws work. The existing approval system in all of these states. Yes. Sorry, Alex.
Can you just wrap up in the next 2 minutes?
I can. So the existing reporting system and how it works in all these states, including Canada, is that, and in the Netherlands and Belgium, is that these are self-reporting systems. So the physician who approves the death can be the same physician who participates in the death, is the same physician who sends in the reports. So when we're talking about the reporting procedure and what's going on in these states, and they say we have effective oversight of the law. In fact, the oversight of the law is specifically designed to protect the physicians. So when Ilora mentioned before that the law actually gives the power to the physicians to cause death. That's exactly what they do. You have to read the language of the bills, read the language of the law, and see what it actually does. The other side wants to sell this as my body, my choice, my freedom, when in fact the law is actually about giving physicians the right in law to cause death. I have quite a bit more information I could share with you, but there's not a lot of time. I'm happy to share my PowerPoint with anybody who contacts me. And Euthanasia Prevention Coalition is easy to find by Googling, etc. And my email is info@epcc.ca. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was a fantastic presentation, and amazing to see just the work you've done in tracking what's going on in the different countries. It occurs to me that societies have a big decision to make. You know, it's we hear a lot of talk now about population inversion, possible global population decline in the second half of this century. And so I think it really is important that countries and societies work out where they stand on this issue, because it really is a central issue. And it's very interesting to hear not just where there is a slide in legislation or a kind of a drift in legislation in some areas, but how many jurisdictions are repeatedly rejecting calls for assisted suicide.
So
now,
I think the key to all these things is that these laws and how they're written, because the fact of it is these laws are not written with clear language on purpose. When I refer to the Canadian law, they did not define the terminology on purpose in order to allow it to develop over time. But you see also this whole concept of how the law works is so important, because this affects how people are dying and how people are killing people. In fact, what's happening.
Wow.
And I think that's essential. When I looked at your Irish bill, it's a bill that's not defined. So what's going to happen is it becomes, if you pass that, it becomes defined by its practice over time, which means it's expansive. And that's what happens. And that's what's happened in Canada.
So Alex Schadenberg of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition International, thank you so much for joining us today, and maybe you can also stay on if you have time for questions. Now, our final speaker is the founder of Pieta House and now CEO of Freeman Healthcare Group. She's a counsellor and psychologist by profession, and as Ireland's foremost mental health champion, she was appointed to Seanad Éireann by Taoiseach Enda Kenny in 2016. She wrote to the Oireachtas Committee on Justice about her concerns over the Dying with Dignity Bill 2020 because of the undermining effect she believes it would have on suicide prevention efforts in Ireland. Joan, you're very welcome. Joan Freeman.
Hello there, and thank
How are you?
Thank you for the invitation. Of course, I hate being Paddy last because I've had to listen to all these speakers beforehand, and of course listening to Kathleen Donald's and video and listening to Alma puts everything into perspective. To be honest, I've been dreading this day. I've been dreading this debate because it challenges us on the preciousness of life. And, you know, 6 weeks ago, it was the 15th anniversary of the opening of Pieta House. And when I think back of Ireland during that time, we were such a different country. I mean, we had no internet for a start, you know. I mean, most houses didn't have internet. There was no such thing as an iPhone. There was so many things that impacted us insofar as that. I mean, for example, if I wanted to go on the internet, I'd have to go down to the local library. So, but Ireland also had its secrets, and the secrets we of course know they're coming out more and more now, obviously of abuse, people hiding their sexual orientation, but death was another secret, and in particular suicide. But when Pieta House opened 15 years ago, Ireland changed. It embraced the knowledge and the information and the removing of the stigma of suicide. And I had the very fortunate position, privilege of being one of those people who would assess a person who came in who either had just attempted suicide or had the very strong desire to take their lives. And I would always ask them two questions. And the first question was, why do you want to die? And invariably, their answer was, I want to stop the pain. and also my family would be better off without me. And my second question was then, why do you want to live? And that was the most powerful question of all, because for the first time for a long time, they started thinking of reasons why they should live. And love and family were the core pieces in that discussion. So when I look at this dignity in dying bill, there are a few things I would just like to comment on. The first is the term assisted suicide. And the reality is the word suicide comes from the Latin word suicidum. Sui means of oneself, and sidium means killing or slaying. And to me, it is trying to soften the word. This bill, this terminology is trying to soften the word of euthanasia. And if this bill goes through, it undermines and cancels all the work that organisations like Pieta House has tried to achieve over the last 15 years, but also undermines the incredible work that global services such as the Samaritans have tried to achieve also, which is saving lives. The thing is, I know that many people who are listening here today and who may be supportive of the bill are supportive probably for one real reason, and that they have witnessed the suffering of a loved one. And this is probably why they're driving or supporting this bill, because they want to prevent this happening to other people, other families. But if we just take a step back and we apply those two questions to the person who might be suffering at this moment, why do you want to die? And they're the same answers. More than likely, they'll be the same answers. I want to stop the pain. But also, I'm a burden to my family. And we heard that word over and over and over today. So if we try to unscrabble the word burden, first of all, if we look at the two answers separately, first of all, about the pain, stopping the pain, we've had very eloquent speakers today speaking about palliative care. So I'm not going to even try to go down that route, because that's their part of this contribution of today's talk. But if we talk about the burden is in the person who's suffering's mind. They're looking at the person, their own family, and they're looking at the concern and the worry on their faces. They're thinking about that their own lives has gone on hold because they're caring for me. And yet, if we start changing the dialogue around the word burden, we're going to have a very different slant on it. So removing that word burden, what if we change it to gift or opportunity? You know, we are given a gift when someone that is close to us is dying or is on this journey. We're given a gift of supporting them, loving them, walking with them. And this is a gift that we can give, the final gift we can give this person. But it's a two-way process, because the person who is dying is giving us a gift. And that gift is to give us the opportunity to cherish them and love them and support them. I think that there are two ways that we can change all of this, and they're very simple ways. One is we need to ask the government, to implore the government to take a different stance on this, to change the fabric of the very rich tapestry of end of life. The government needs to invest in end of life, in the services of end of life. And by doing that, they are sending out a very clear message that this government is compassionate, it's fearless, and it is willing to challenge and face the challenges of end of life, which will show respect not just of the people of our nation, but respect for all humanity. I think the second thing then is we need to change the narrative around end of life. We need people to realize that the word burden has gone, that we have gratitude, love, and support. So, by the way, if you saw me moving my eyes right and left, I do not have the IT skills to share a screen, so I'm looking at black notes that are in front of me. But if just to finalise, to be honest, I need to finalise this. That my fear is that if this bill goes through, we are sending a very clear message to people who are facing the end of life. We're telling them that there is no hope, that there is no care, and that you are a burden. And if you look, one of the things that the Irish are great at, we look at death notices all the time, especially as we get older. And if you look at these death notices, you will see words such as peacefully, died peacefully, or surrounded by family. That is the experience that every person should have and should experience and should be open to. Because this is the experience we should want for everyone. And while death and dying is still a secret in Ireland, it's a secret because we're afraid to talk about it. And the reality is, though, that because we're afraid and because it remains a secret, it means that we are not addressing it, either the government or us as a nation. But, you know, we've faced that fear before. And if you think about Pieta House and Darkness into Light, and how the country embraced this fear of suicide and facing it, we can do it again. And we can do it with the people who are most vulnerable, facing the final part of their life. And I'm saying to you today, let's journey with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joan, for sharing that. And this is just one message in. My daughter does the Pieta Darkness into Light every year and missed it during COVID. Joan, thank you for your work over the years, shining a light on this important issue. I especially liked your point about changing the narrative about the end of life. Thank you for everything you've done and continue to do so. So Joan Freeman, founder of Pieta House and CEO of the Freeman Healthcare Group, thank you so much for talking to us. And I hope maybe you can stay, because we're going to move into a time of questions and answers now. We've finished with our presentations and we have maybe about 10 minutes if our panelists are available for various questions. One question that's come in is what can you say about the hard cases where people claim their autonomy is being disrespected if we do not legislate for assisted dying and assisted suicide and euthanasia? Nice, easy one to start with. Sorry about that.
I think I can speak to that.
Sarah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think that, you know, there are hard cases. I think we've heard a lot about the fear that patients living with life-limiting illnesses have about being a burden. But I think one of the things that is driving this debate is the fear of people that they will die with pain. And I think that's really overestimated in people's minds. I think there will be hard cases, but hard cases don't make for good laws, they make for bad laws. We need to protect the entire society and protect the most vulnerable in our society. And legislating for the wishes of a few individuals is not a reason to put the rest of society and vulnerable members of society at risk.
It's interesting you say the thing of the overestimation of pain, Sarah, because I actually I took a call from someone at the radio station this week, and she said she was in favor of legislation for euthanasia, but she mentioned that her mother had died when she was young, and while she didn't have a lot of memory, she remembered that she suffered. And she said that she had children herself and grandchildren on the way. She loved life, but she had told them that she favored the idea of euthanasia. What would you say to her? You know, are there things? I'd say that I did talk to her, and probably I would say that there were some things that she hadn't thought through. But what would you say to her?
I think this is why we need to have a broader national conversation about death and dying. I think people really overestimate the likelihood that they will suffer physically towards the end of life, and palliative medicine and pain management have moved on hugely. You know, there's so many of our patients who have witnessed people suffer 30 years ago or 20 years ago, and we just have a lot, you know, more options now, a lot more expertise, and we've, you know, there's lots and lots of evidence to show that the number of people who have uncontrolled pain or physical symptoms at the end of life is very, very small. I think that there's a real fear around death and dying. And I think one of the things that in our day-to-day practice, Faith and Miriam might agree, you know, I spend a huge amount of time allaying people's fears, talking them through what dying is like, that it's a gentle process, it's not traumatic, you know, because people don't have that experience of death. Death used to be in people's houses. It's now moved into the hospitals and, you know, other institutions. So I think that by having a broader debate around death and dying, I think a lot of people's fears can be allayed. But I think that's,
Well, here's a question well, I'd love to get an answer from all three of you doctors, but it's a question which I think is helpful. Without breaching patient confidentiality, could the panel give some more really specific practical examples of palliative care in action, since most of us only have a vague idea of what it is?
Well, I think Sarah has already spoken to the idea that people die peacefully. By and large, what we see every day is people very peacefully dying, but with lots of sadness around, because it is sad. There is a loss and there's no getting rid of that sadness, but we need to support people through it. So family are often left with a feeling of sadness, but it's not painful. So that's the first thing to say. But the second thing, specific example that you asked for, in very recent times, I met a person who was in severe pain, had a new diagnosis of a cancer, very similar to your radio listener, who as a child had witnessed the death of a parent and had traumatic memories from it, found it difficult to talk about. And when I met him, the person wasn't able to sleep. Because they did have quite severe pain. And I suppose learning how to manage pain is something that we would promote, but that we can do. And with very simple measures over just a short number of days, using morphine, which again, people are afraid of, but it's excellent for managing pain. He shifted. So he shifted from a person who said, yes, if you gave me those pills now, I would take them. I want to protect my family from experiencing what happened to me. Within a very short number of days, that was gone. And he said, no, I wouldn't take them today. No, I'm feeling much better.
Yeah.
So in Canada, where this is legal, I get phone calls all the time from family members and people who are then, so let's say a husband is considering euthanasia and the wife is all concerned about this. And what we're finding most often that people have fear. So they're dealing with a natural human reality, and that is fear. So that we see this also in the data out of the Netherlands and Oregon, etc. But data can only go for so far. But when you're talking to people, they're talking about the fear, their fear of the possible future suffering, the fear of what may come. And they're thinking that they want to escape that fear. But there's also this second level that's occurring with a lot of people, and they call and they're dealing with this feeling of abandonment and loneliness. So you have the combination of this fear, which is a normal human reality. We all experience fear. And then there's also this other side of things where a lot of people are, going through these conditions alone. They might not be in pain or whatever, but they are alone and lonely and feeling that, what is my hope, right? They have this feeling of a loss of hope. So really what euthanasia is then dealing with in this whole situation is people are then responding to their fear and their loss of hope and their loneliness and their abandonment, and it's a bad mixture. because we're not actually then bringing people a good death by lethal injection at all. What we're doing is we're ending a life, yes, but we're not ending a life in a hopeful situation. We're not trying to bring families together and have a nice, true death with dignity, as we would say.
A question again for the doctors is just like I have a daughter who hopes to be a doctor, you know, and you know there's so many other young people who aspire to enter the medical profession. Can you talk a bit about you know how something like this could affect your profession in terms of its culture?
Well, I suppose one, I wish your daughter all the best. Medicine is a wonderful, profession to work in, to be able to help people. So I do hope it all goes very well for her and she enjoys it. But I suppose a core issue for us as doctors, as nurses, as healthcare workers, is that we're there to help the patient, and the patient actually needs to know that we're 100% there for them. Legalizing assisted suicide and euthanasia changes the healthcare worker-patient relationship entirely, because there's always that it changes the power dynamic. Unfortunately, that's a kind of an unacknowledged or maybe an under-acknowledged issue in this. When we see a patient as doctors, the patient needs to know that we're focused completely on their care and individualizing the best care option for them, while legalizing assisted suicide and euthanasia undermines that. It actually brings another issue at play, issue at play, and actually it underestimates what's been coming through a lot. And I see Alex nodding, so I'm sure he can discuss it better. Is that it's actually about fear of the unknown, uncertainty, fear of different. But actually, we can talk through that, or much more important, it's important to listen to patients voice their concerns. And we know that people can change their minds over a long period of time, as the Tilda study has shown, as Baroness Finlay discussed, and as Alex eloquently discussed as well. And people are complex. We're all complex. We are feelings change. There's logic, but our practice is influenced by logic with feelings. And like Faith said earlier about the environment, the culture that we're in influences what happens so strongly. So this would have an enormous impact on the doctor-patient relationship, and we need to know as patients. I mean, we all will be a patient at some stage or have been a patient. And what I'm hearing this morning is a broad coalition. We're here and Conor, I want to thank Conor and Kathleen and Elma so much for sharing what it's like, what the lived experience it's like. We're here as doctors, and for Joan kindly sharing the experience from Pieta, and for advocating for persons who have mental health challenges. And we're all concerned about the impact of this bill. And Alex and Professor Finlay have kindly explained the international perspective, and we're all saying the same thing. We are worried about how unsafe this bill is and the risks to patients and to families, because what happens to the patient affects the family too, and the loved ones too, about legalizing assisted suicide and euthanasia. It's just such an enormous societal shift that an awful lot of discussion and thought needs to go into it.
Thank you, Miriam. Now I just have I have a question that I'm going to put to, I suppose, our three, I suppose, advocates, we'd say, Joan, Elma and Conor, you know, with your work for disability rights and mental health rights. A question that was put to Elma, but I'm going to put it to all three of you, but I'm going to put it to you that you are you're in an elevator with a politician. Forget about COVID for a minute and social distancing, but you have just a short journey up a few floors to talk to them about why you think this bill and introduction of assisted suicide is a bad idea. What would you say to him or her? Maybe Elma, you can kick off.
I'd probably press the stop button first anyway. Have a good time. But you'd have to go through everything with him and just say that the people's worries and fears, you know, as they were said earlier on there, your worries and fears today won't be the same as they will be in a week's time. You know, you have to take into account what and it's a broader range as well. Like, you know, your pain mightn't be as big as somebody else's pain or something like that going forward. That you know, assisted suicide really is what it is, and you have to call it what it is. It isn't a dying with dignity. There's no dignity in the bill at the moment, and I don't think there could ever be a dignity in dying with assisted suicide. It's there. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in there and say something about it, but I know for Donal that he lived with cancer. He was totally aware of what he was going through. He wasn't under any illusion of where he was going, or any delusion either of where he was going. The palliative care team took not only care of him, but they took care of us as a family too, and they helped us so much so that that we knew we did all that we could for Donal, and that helped us in our grieving process after as well. That knowing that we had no regrets of what we did, everything for Donal after. And I think that's a huge because you have to live with the consequences of what you've done. And if you help somebody to die, you're going to live with those consequences as well.
And in that case, it was a testament to the whole nation came along with you, you know, in that journey. Joan, what would you say?
Well, as a former senator,
you've been in those corridors, yes.
Yeah, I was in the lift with politicians, but what I would say to them is be brave. Stand up for what you believe in. Stop looking for the populist vote, and truly, truly listen to the argument here that this bill is going to cause havoc, absolute havoc. It's going to ruin our appreciation of preciousness of life and humanity. So I would say to that politician, for God's sake, for once, stand up on your own and be counted.
Thanks, Joan. How about Conor? We're going to give you the last word. If you had this opportunity, what would you say to our politicians?
I would say that for those that are questioning that euthanasia is a bad idea, I can only speak from my experience and say that I'm informed by my faith when I say that my life was not created by me. My life, my parents contributed to giving me life, and therefore when other people give me my life, I don't have the authority to take away my life. I don't have the authority to do assisted suicide or euthanasia or anything like that. And just to echo what Gunnar was said in that video, if I took away my life, my parents' world would be torn upside down, and my parents have worked so hard for me to get me where I am right now, and if I opted for euthanasia, that would be a poor way to repay my parents' love for me. And I would urge the politicians to consider that when they're debating the euthanasia bill.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing there? What Alex said there earlier with the figures going in Canada and American places, it reminded me of Ireland in the 1950s and 60s. When you know, somebody could be put into a psychiatric hospital, nothing wrong with them, maybe just a slight disability, or sometimes just maybe the younger person in a family farm, that they wanted to get rid of somebody like that, and they were signed into psychiatric wards and psychiatric units by a local doctor or a brother or sister or something like that. So really, we're going way backwards. Like, we're going backwards with this back to the 1950s and 60s.
Wow. So thank you all for being available to respond to questions. This actually brings us to the end of our conference. Thank you for attending End of Life Matters, a conference of Hope Ireland. I hope you found it informative on this such an important issue. My thanks to all our contributors: Conor Lynott, Baroness Ilora Finlay, Dr. Miriam Colleran, Dr. Faith Cranfield, Dr. Sarah McLean, Kathleen Rogers, Elma Walsh, Alex Schadenberg and Joan Freeman. Also, thanks to everyone who submitted questions. Hope Ireland are going to be going through those questions and responding to them by adding to the FAQs, the frequently asked questions, on the website. As I said at the beginning, just if you're prompted or affected by any of the themes discussed today, I would encourage you to reach out to someone for help yourself, or maybe it brings into your mind someone who needs your encouragement to reach out and offer them help. My name is Steve Johnson, and on behalf of Hope Ireland, I'd like to wish you all a great Saturday and a great 2021. Until we meet again, Slán go fóill.
Bye.